My hands, lined with wrinkles, but still strong, expertly kneaded the dough for the sweet potato pie. The aroma of cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla already filled the kitchen, permeating every corner of my cozy home, which I had lovingly maintained for the past 50 years. Today was a special day, my granddaughter Tiffany's engagement. I, Eleanor May Johnson, a 78-year-old woman who had seen more sunrises than most people could imagine, felt a surge of energy and joy. I had paid for most of the celebration myself, from the hall rental to the catering, because I wanted my Tiffany, my only granddaughter, to have nothing but the best. My pension, modest but stable, and the small savings accumulated over years of working as a nurse, allowed me to do this. I always believed that family was the most important thing, and I poured all my soul, all my love, all my strength into it. I hummed an old gospel song as I rolled out a thin layer of dough for the crust. My fingers, calloused from years of caring for others, moved with familiar ease. In this house, steeped in memories and the aromas of countless family dinners, every object, every crack on the wall told its own story. This old wooden table, where generations of my family had gathered, had witnessed so much laughter, so many tears, so many important decisions. It was a witness to my life, my love, my losses. I felt like a part of this house, its soul, its heart. And the thought that my entire family would gather here today to celebrate such an important event filled me with warmth. I had just finished putting the pies in the oven when my daughter, Brenda, walked into the kitchen. She was 53, and she had always been my pride, my firstborn, my hope. But lately, something had changed. Her eyes, once full of warmth, now seemed cold and distant. Her smile, once genuine, now looked strained. Today she was dressed in a strict business suit that seemed to emphasize her aloofness. She didn't hug me, didn't kiss my cheek as usual. Instead, she just stopped at the doorway, crossed her arms over her chest, and gave me a look that made me feel not like a mother, but like some unfamiliar object. "Mom," she began, and her voice was unusually formal, devoid of its usual tenderness. "We need to talk. It's important." My heart sank. I knew that tone. It was a tone that foreshadowed something unpleasant. I turned off the oven, though the pies weren't ready yet, and faced her. "Has something happened, dear?" I asked, trying to remain calm, though an anxious knot was already forming inside me. Brenda walked to the table and sat opposite me, not looking me in the eye. She fidgeted with the edge of her handbag, which was unusual for her. She was usually so confident, so composed. Her nervousness spread to me. "Mom," she repeated, and this time, something like irritation crept into her voice. "Tiffany and I have been discussing your future a lot. And we've come to the conclusion that you'd be better off in a nursing home." The air in the kitchen, filled with the sweet scent of pies, suddenly turned icy. Brenda's words hit me like a physical blow. A nursing home? Me? Eleanor May Johnson, who had spent her entire life caring for others, who had raised her, who had given her everything she had. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands, which moments ago had been expertly kneading dough, now trembled. What are you saying, Brenda?" My voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't believe my ears. This was some cruel joke, wasn't it? Brenda finally looked up and met my gaze. There was no sympathy, no regret in her eyes. Only cold, calculated determination. "Mom, you're not getting any younger," she said, as if it were an undeniable fact that I had somehow overlooked. "It's getting harder for you to manage the house. We're worried about you. There, you'll have round-the-clock care, medical supervision. It's for your own good." For my own good? My good meant being torn from my home, from my life, from my memories, and thrown into a strange place, among strangers? My mind refused to accept it. I looked at her, trying to find even a spark of the Brenda I knew and loved, that little girl I had held in my arms, fed, comforted. But she wasn't there. "I'm perfectly capable." My voice grew stronger, a hint of indignation in it. "I cook, I clean, I shop. I don't need round-the-clock care. I'm not sick. I'm not infirm." Brenda sighed, as if I were an unreasonable child who didn't understand the obvious. "Mom, please, don't make this difficult," she said, and a note of weariness entered her voice. We've already decided everything. We found a wonderful facility, very respectable. It has all the amenities, entertainment. You'll like it there. I'll like it? How could I like a place that symbolized the end of my independence, the end of my freedom? I felt tears sting my eyes, but I held them back. I wouldn't let her see my weakness. This is my home, Brenda, I said, gesturing to the walls, to the photographs on the shelf, to the old dresser I inherited from my mother. Mine. I was born here, I grew up here, I've lived here my whole life. You can't just kick me out. Brenda scoffed, and that scoff was the most painful of all. Mom, don't be so dramatic, she said. No one's kicking you out. We're just taking care of you. The house is too big for you alone. It requires a lot of upkeep. We're thinking of selling it. The money will go towards your upkeep at the nursing home, and the rest, well, the rest will be invested in Tiffany's future. It's logical, isn't it? My lungs seemed to stop breathing. Sell my home? My home, which was a part of me, a part of my soul? And use the money for my upkeep and give the rest to Tiffany? This was not just unfair. This was betrayal. I looked at her, and in that moment, I saw not my daughter, but a stranger, a cold person driven by greed and selfishness. You can't do this, I whispered, feeling the ground slip from beneath my feet. We can, Mom, Brenda replied calmly. We have all the necessary documents. We've thought everything through for a long time. You know how much we love you. We just want you to be safe and comfortable. Safe? Comfortable? Those words sounded like a mockery. I felt anger begin to rise in my chest, pushing out the pain. Anger I hadn't felt in years. Anger at the injustice, at the betrayal, at the complete lack of compassion. When? I asked, and my voice was as firm as stone. Tomorrow morning, Brenda replied, without batting an eye. We've already arranged everything. A car will come to take you. Your things are already packed. My things were already packed? They did this behind my back? While I was baking pies for Tiffany's engagement, while I was dreaming of a happy future for my granddaughter, they were packing my things, preparing to send me into exile. This was too much. This was unbearable. I stood up from the table, feeling my legs tremble. I walked to the window and looked at my garden, at the blooming roses I had planted years ago. Every rose, every flower was a part of my life, a part of my story. And now they were going to take it all away from me. I'm not going, I said, and my voice was full of determination. I'm not leaving my home. Brenda stood up and came to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, but there was no warmth in her touch. Mom, please, don't make us use force, her voice became threatening. We don't want to. But if you resist, we'll have to. It's for your own good, believe me. For my own good. That was the phrase they used to justify their cruelty, their greed. I turned to her, and in my eyes, there must have been so much pain and anger that Brenda recoiled. You'll regret this, Brenda, I whispered. You'll regret it very much. She just shook her head, as if I were an old, crazy woman who didn't understand what she was saying. Mom, please, she said, and something like a plea entered her voice. Don't make this harder than it is. But for me, it was already harder than she could imagine. This wasn't just a decision about moving. This was a decision about my life, my freedom, my dignity. And they were going to take it all away from me. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat in my living room, surrounded by the things that were part of my life, and looked at them as if saying goodbye. Every photograph, every book, every souvenir, all of it was a part of me. And now it was all going to be taken away. I remembered years ago, when Brenda was little, she came to me with a scraped knee. I hugged her, comforted her, cleaned her wound. I was always there for her, always supported her, always loved her unconditionally. And now she was doing this to me. How could she? How could my own daughter do this to me? I thought of Tiffany, my granddaughter. She had always been so sweet, so considerate. Was she involved in this too? Did she also want me in a nursing home? The thought was unbearable. I had always considered her my little princess, my hope. The night passed in a restless half-sleep. I heard every rustle, every creak in the house. My heart pounded in my chest like a trapped bird. I felt cornered, helpless. But somewhere deep inside me, beneath the layers of pain and despair, something new began to stir. A spark. A spark of resistance. The next morning, as the first rays of sun barely touched my window, I heard a knock at the door. I knew who it was. My time had come. I took a deep breath, trying to gather all my strength. I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't let them see my weakness. When Brenda and Tiffany entered the house, they were followed by two burly men in uniform. They were nursing home staff, or perhaps just movers hired to do this dirty work. My heart sank again, but this time I felt not only pain, but also cold determination. "Mom, we're here to help you," Brenda said, her voice unnaturally cheerful. She avoided my gaze. I just nodded, not saying a word. I didn't want to waste my last strength on empty arguments. I wanted to save it for what was to come. They began to carry out my belongings. My photo albums, my books, my favorite figurines that I had collected all my life. Every item they carried out of the house was like a blow to my heart. I watched as a part of my life disappeared, carried away by strange hands. When they reached my bedroom, I saw that my old jewelry box, which stood on my dressing table, was open. My jewelry, which I had collected over many years, which were gifts from my late husband, from my friends, from my family, were piled in a heap. I felt anger rise in my chest again. "What are you doing?" I asked, and my voice sounded louder than I expected. Brenda turned around. "Mom, we're just packing your things. Don't worry, everything will be safe and sound. Don't touch my jewelry," I said, walking towards the dressing table. "These are personal items." Tiffany, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke. "Grandma, why do you need so many old trinkets? We can sell them and you'll have more money for your needs." I looked at her, and in that moment, I realized that she was just like Brenda. Greed and selfishness had blinded her. She didn't see the value in these things because to her, they were just trinkets that could be sold. She didn't understand that each of these trinkets was a part of my history, a part of my soul. "These are not trinkets, Tiffany," I said, and my voice trembled with indignation. "This is my life. These are my memories." Brenda came over and took my hand. "Mom, please don't make a scene. We're running late. The car is waiting." I pulled my hand away. "I'm not going." At that moment, one of the men in uniform approached me. "Mrs. Johnson, please don't resist. It will be easier for everyone." I looked at him, then at Brenda and Tiffany. There was no trace of doubt in their eyes, no hint of regret. They were determined to carry out their plan. "I'm not going," I repeated, but this time my voice was weaker. I felt my strength leaving me. I was alone against all of them. The man took my arm, then the second man took my other arm. They began to lead me to the exit. I resisted, but their grip was too strong. I felt helpless, like a doll being dragged against its will. "Let me go," I cried, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of their footsteps. Brenda and Tiffany walked ahead, not looking back. They didn't want to see my pain, didn't want to hear my cries. They just wanted to get this over with. When we left the house, I saw a large black car, like a hearse, on the street. The door was open. I felt a cold wind pierce me to the bone. This was the end. The end of my life as I knew it. They pushed me into the car. I fell onto the seat, feeling the tears I had held back for so long finally stream from my eyes. I looked out the window as my house, my beloved house, grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view. I sat in the car, trembling with cold and despair. My heart was broken. My own daughter, my own granddaughter, whom I loved more than anything in the world, had betrayed me. They had taken everything from me, my home, my memories, my freedom. I felt empty, broken. But somewhere deep inside me, beneath the layers of pain and despair, the spark of resistance that had ignited yesterday began to flare. They thought they had broken me. But they were wrong. They were very wrong. The Golden Sunset nursing home was exactly as I had imagined it, sterile, impersonal, and dreary. Ivory-colored walls, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the scent of old age and despair, and a silence broken only by occasional coughs and the creak of wheelchairs. I was brought here like a sack of potatoes, without any respect, without a single word of comfort. Brenda and Tiffany, as soon as the car stopped, quickly got out, giving me only a fleeting glance, full of awkwardness and, it seemed to me relief. They didn't even stay to make sure I was settled, didn't ask how I felt. They just left, leaving me to the care of strangers. My room was small, with one bed, a nightstand, and a closet. Faded curtains hung on the window, and the view from the window was of a gray, dreary courtyard. None of my belongings, except for one travel bag, were with me. My photo albums, my books, my favorite figurines, all remained there in my house, which was now probably being prepared for sale. I sat on the bed, which felt too soft and foreign, and tried to hold back my tears. But they flowed anyway, burning my cheeks. This was not just grief. It was a feeling of the deepest humiliation, a betrayal that pierced me to the bone. The first days at Golden Sunset were hell. I felt lost, cut off from everything dear to me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat in my room, looking out the window, replaying the events of the past few days in my mind. How could Brenda do this? How could my own daughter, whom I loved more than life, betray me so cruelly? And Tiffany, my sweet granddaughter, who had always been so gentle and attentive. Was she also in on it with her mother? That thought was the most painful. Every day was like the last. Waking up at the same time, breakfast in the common dining room where the elderly sat at tables, staring into space, lunch, dinner, and again that suffocating silence. The nurses and orderlies were polite, but their politeness was cold and distant. They did their job, but there was no sympathy or warmth in their eyes. I felt like one of many, one of those who were living out their last days in this impersonal place. I tried to find some solace. I tried to read books from the local library, but the words blurred before my eyes. I tried to knit, but my hands trembled and the stitches got tangled. I felt my spirit fading day by day as I turned into one of those silent shadows that roamed the corridors of Golden Sunset. One day, during breakfast, I overheard two nurses talking. They were discussing the sale of my house. "You know, Mrs. Johnson's house sold very quickly," one said. "For such a price. Looks like her daughter made a good profit from it." "Yeah," the other replied. "And the old lady doesn't even know. Thinks she's here temporarily." Their words struck me like lightning. So, my house was already sold. My home, my fortress, my sanctuary, was sold behind my back. The feeling of anger that I thought had already subsided flared up in me with new force. They didn't just kick me out. They took everything from me. They erased me from their lives, as if I had never existed. At that moment, something changed within me. The pain and despair that had suffocated me began to recede, giving way to cold, calculated determination. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was Eleanor May Johnson, a woman who had survived the Great Depression, a war, the loss of her husband, and who had always found the strength to fight. They thought they had broken me. But they were wrong. They were very wrong. I began to observe. I observed the staff, the other residents, the daily routine. I listened to conversations, gathered information, like a small spider weaving its web. I learned that the nurses often discussed residents' personal affairs, that they were inattentive to details, that they often left their phones unattended. I learned that on Thursdays, computer literacy classes were held in the library for seniors. That's what I needed. The next day, I asked the nurse to sign me up for the classes. She looked at me with surprise. "Mrs. Johnson, are you sure?" "It's quite difficult," she said. "I'm sure," I replied, and such determination was in my voice that she didn't argue. The classes were boring and slow. The instructor, a young woman named Sarah, seemed to doubt that any of us could master a computer. But I was determined. I listened carefully to every word, wrote down every detail. I asked questions, many questions, which annoyed Sarah, but I didn't care. I was hungry for knowledge, like never before. I learned to use the internet, send emails, search for information. I spent hours in the library, studying everything I could find about the rights of the elderly, about real estate fraud, about how to find information about people. I felt like a detective gathering clues. One day, as I sat in the library, I overheard Sarah talking on the phone. She was talking about some important document she needed to send. She left her laptop open on the table and walked away to talk to one of the residents. My heart beat faster. This was my chance. I quickly approached the laptop. My fingers, clumsy moments ago, now moved with surprising speed. I quickly found the right file, copied it to a flash drive I had secretly brought with me, and deleted all traces of my presence. When Sarah returned, I was already sitting at my desk, pretending to read a book. The file turned out to be a list of all the residents of Golden Sunset, their personal data, medical records, and, most importantly, information about their relatives and their financial situation. This was what I needed. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. Over the next few weeks, I continued to gather information. I eavesdropped on staff conversations, read discarded newspapers, studied advertisements. I learned that Golden Sunset had financial problems, that they were trying to attract new investors. I learned that Brenda and Tiffany regularly called the nursing home to check on me, but never visited. They just wanted to make sure I was still there, that I wasn't causing them any trouble. I began to plan my escape. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I was an old woman, trapped in a nursing home. But I was determined. I knew I had to get out of there to get revenge on those who had treated me so cruelly. I started training. I walked the corridors, did exercises to strengthen my muscles. I studied the building plans, memorized the location of surveillance cameras, exits, staff shift schedules. I knew I had to be ready for anything. One night, when everyone was asleep, I crept into the kitchen. I knew there was a spare key to the back door there. My hands trembled when I searched for it in the dark cabinet. Finally, my fingers found the cold metal. I took the key, feeling adrenaline surge through my veins. I returned to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. I hid the key under the mattress. Now I had a plan. And I had the key. I waited for the right moment. I knew I had to act carefully so as not to arouse suspicion. I continued to pretend to be a weak, helpless old woman who had resigned herself to her fate. But inside me, a fire burned. Finally, the day came when I decided to act. It was a Thursday, the day Sarah held her computer literacy classes. I knew that most of the nurses would be busy at that time, and the surveillance cameras would be less attentive. I put on my darkest clothes, which had been brought from home. I hid the key in my pocket. I took a small bag with my essentials, some money, documents I had managed to hide, and the flash drive with the information I had collected. I left my room, trying to move silently. The corridors were empty. I heard only my own heartbeat. I walked past the nurse's station. She was asleep, her face buried in a book. I smiled. Luck was on my side. I reached the back door. My hands trembled as I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. I opened the door and stepped outside. The night air was cold and fresh. I took a deep breath, feeling it fill my lungs. I was free. I walked down the street, not looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to move forward. I walked for hours until I reached a bus stop. I sat on the bench, feeling fatigue wash over me. But I was happy. I was free. I got on the first bus I saw. I didn't know where it was going, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from that place, from that nightmare, as possible. I looked out the window as the city lights passed by. I felt like a bird escaped from its cage. I rode the bus all night. When dawn broke, I got off at some unfamiliar stop. I was in a small town, somewhere far from home. I had a little money, but I knew I needed to find a job. I couldn't afford to be helpless. I found a small hotel where I could rent a room for a few days. I showered, changed, and went outside. I needed to find a job. I went to several shops and cafes, but everywhere I was rejected. "You're too old," they said. "We don't have any vacancies." I felt despair begin to creep in again. But I didn't give up. I remembered everything my mother had taught me. "Never give up, Eleanor," she would say. "Even when it seems like all is lost, there's always a way out." I went into a small bakery. A young woman with kind eyes stood behind the counter. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for work," I said. "I can bake." "I've been baking all my life." The woman looked at me doubtfully. "We don't have any vacancies, Mrs. Johnson," I said. "Eleanor Johnson." "Mrs. Johnson," she repeated. "I'm sorry." I felt tears welling up again. I was so close. "Please," I said. "Give me a chance. I can show you what I can do." The woman must have seen something in my eyes. Perhaps despair, perhaps determination. "All right," she said. "Show me what you can do." I rolled up my sleeves and started working. I kneaded dough, rolled it out, shaped pies. My hands moved with familiar ease. I felt my strength, my confidence, returning. The woman watched me with surprise. When I finished, she tried one of my pies. Her eyes widened. This is amazing," she said. "I've never tasted anything like it." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt happy. "You're hired, Mrs. Johnson," she said. "You can start tomorrow." I thanked her, feeling joy fill my chest. I had found a job. I had found a way to survive. I worked at the bakery every day from morning till night. I baked bread, pies, cookies. I felt my life returning, felt myself becoming myself again. I became friends with the bakery owner. Her name was Maria. She was a kind and sympathetic woman who accepted me without asking too many questions. I rented a small room above the bakery. It was a modest dwelling, but it was mine. I felt safe, felt free. I knew I had a long way to go, but I was ready for it. I was determined to get revenge on those who had treated me so cruelly. I continued to gather information. I used my computer skills to find information about Brenda and Tiffany. I learned that Brenda had sold my house for a very large sum, and that she had used that money to buy herself a new car and renovate her house. Tiffany, it turned out, also got her share and spent it on a lavish wedding and honeymoon. They were living off my money, enjoying my life, while I was rotting in a nursing home. Anger rose in me again. But this time it was not blind anger, but cold, calculated fury. I knew I had to act carefully. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I started saving money. Every cent I earned, I saved. I knew I would need money for my plan. I worked tirelessly, sparing no effort. I was determined to achieve my goal. One day, while working at the bakery, I overheard two customers talking. They were discussing a charity organization that helped elderly people in difficult situations. My heart beat faster. This was what I needed. I found information about this organization online. It was called Hope for Seniors. I contacted them, told them my story. They listened to me with sympathy, offered their help. They were willing to help me find a lawyer who would help me get my house back. I met with the lawyer. His name was Mr. Davis. He was an elderly but very experienced lawyer. He listened to my story, carefully studied all the documents I had collected. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "you have a very strong case. Your daughter acted illegally. We can sue and demand the return of your house." My heart filled with hope. Finally, I saw light at the end of the tunnel. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "We need to gather more evidence," Mr. Davis replied. "We need to find witnesses who will confirm that you were of sound mind when you were sent to the nursing home. We need to prove that your daughter acted out of selfish motives." I nodded. I was willing to do anything to get my house back. I started looking for witnesses. I remembered some of the residents of Golden Sunset who had been kind to me. I contacted them, told them my story. They were shocked to learn the truth. They agreed to testify in court. I also contacted some of my old friends who had known me all my life. They were also willing to confirm that I had always been of sound mind and independent. I felt my strength grow every day. I was no longer a helpless old woman. I was a woman fighting for her life, for her dignity, for her justice. We filed a lawsuit. Brenda and Tiffany were shocked when they received the summons. They didn't expect me to resist. They thought I would just resign myself to my fate. But they were wrong. The trial was long and exhausting. Brenda and Tiffany tried to prove that I was out of my mind, that I couldn't make decisions. They brought in false witnesses who claimed I was incapacitated. But I had my own witnesses who told the truth. I sat in the courtroom, listening to their lies, their slander. My heart ached, but I held on. I knew that truth was on my side. One day, during a break, I saw Brenda and Tiffany talking to their lawyer. They looked agitated, their faces pale. I realized they were beginning to realize their plan was falling apart. "Mrs. Johnson," Mr. Davis said, "they are offering a settlement. They are willing to return your house and pay compensation." My heart beat faster. This was a victory. But I didn't just want my house back. I wanted them to pay for what they had done. "I don't agree," I said. "I want them to answer for their actions. I want them to be punished." Mr. Davis looked at me with respect. As you wish, Mrs. Johnson. We will fight to the end. The trial continued. The tension grew every day. I felt my strength leaving me, but I didn't give up. I knew I had to fight to the end. One day, as I was testifying, I saw Brenda and Tiffany sitting in the courtroom, their faces full of despair. They looked broken, defeated. I felt satisfied. This was what I wanted. I told the court the whole truth. I told them how Brenda and Tiffany had betrayed me, how they had taken everything from me. I told them about the pain I had endured, the humiliation I had experienced. My words were full of emotion, full of pain, full of anger. When I finished, silence fell over the courtroom. The judge looked at Brenda and Tiffany, then at me. I knew he had made his decision. The tension in the courtroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every glance, every movement, every word was imbued with hidden hostility and despair. I sat in my place, directly opposite Brenda and Tiffany, and watched them. Their faces were pale, and their eyes darted around the room like cornered animals. They hadn't expected this turn of events. They thought that I, old Eleanor, would simply disappear into the impersonal corridors of the nursing home, forgotten and broken. But I was here, strong, determined, and ready to fight for my truth to the end. The judge, a venerable man with graying temples and a penetrating gaze, listened carefully to the testimony. My lawyer, Mr. Davis, was a true master of his craft. He asked questions clearly, concisely, building a logical chain of events that left no doubt about my rightness. He called witnesses who confirmed my mental capacity, my independence, my love for my home and garden. My old friends, neighbors, even some former Golden Sunset employees whom I had managed to find, testified, gradually dismantling the carefully constructed lies of Brenda and Tiffany. I remembered how meticulously I had gathered this evidence, how at night, after long shifts at the bakery, I would sit at the computer, studying laws, searching for information, contacting people. Every call, every letter, every meeting was a step towards this moment. I felt that with each new testimony, with each new fact, their confidence waned and mine grew stronger. When Nurse Sarah, the very one who taught computer classes at Golden Sunset, was called to the stand, Brenda and Tiffany visibly tensed. Sarah, young and a little naive, but honest, told how diligently I had studied, how I had asked questions, how full of life and interest I had been. She confirmed that I was absolutely of sound mind and memory. She even mentioned how I had accidentally found her laptop open, but, to my relief, she didn't go into detail about how I had accessed the files. Her testimony was clear and sincere, and it made a strong impression on the judge. After Sarah's testimony, Mr. Davis asked to admit into evidence the emails and messages that Brenda and Tiffany had sent to each other, discussing the sale of my house and the distribution of the money. These messages, which I had so carefully copied from Sarah's laptop, were irrefutable proof of their selfish motives. In them, they openly discussed how quickly the house could be sold, how much money they would get, and what they would spend it on. They even joked about how I would enjoy life in the nursing home while they spent my money. When these messages were read aloud, a murmur went through the courtroom. Brenda and Tiffany's faces turned crimson, then deathly pale. Tiffany tried to say something, but her lawyer, a man with a stern face and tired eyes, gestured for her to stop. He understood that the game was lost. I looked at them, and there was no triumph or malice in my chest. Only cold, bitter satisfaction. This was not revenge for revenge's sake. This was justice. They had dug their own grave. Next was Brenda's cross-examination. She tried to appear confident, but her voice trembled, and her eyes started around. Mr. Davis asked her questions about her motives, about her care for me, about why she hadn't consulted me when deciding my future. Every one of her answers was full of lies and evasions, but Mr. Davis skillfully exposed her, comparing her words with the evidence. Mrs. Smith, Mr. Davis addressed Brenda. She had taken her husband's surname. You claim that you acted solely out of concern for your mother. But how then do you explain these messages in which you discuss the sale of her house and the distribution of funds with your daughter? Brenda hesitated. It was just planning. We wanted to ensure her a dignified old age. A dignified old age that included selling her house without her consent and sending her to a nursing home against her will. Mr. Davis's voice was full of sarcasm. And at the same time, you buy yourself a new car and renovate your house, and your daughter has a lavish wedding with money from the sale of your mother's house? Brenda remained silent, her face contorted with anger. She couldn't answer. "You're not answering, Mrs. Smith," Mr. Davis continued. "Your actions speak louder than any words. You used your mother, her trust, her savings, to enrich yourselves. You betrayed her, abandoned her like a useless object." Brenda jumped up from her seat. "That's a lie. My mother she was out of her mind. She didn't understand what she was doing." "Was she out of her mind when she baked pies for your daughter's engagement, which she herself paid for?" Mr. Davis's voice was icy. "Was she out of her mind when she cared for you her entire life? Was she out of her mind when she gave you everything she had?" Brenda sat down again, her shoulders slumped. She was defeated. Then it was Tiffany's turn. She was even more flustered than Brenda. Her youthful self-confidence had evaporated, leaving only fear and confusion. She tried to deny her involvement, claiming she was just following her mother's instructions. But her own messages, her own words read aloud, were irrefutable. "Miss Smith," Mr. Davis addressed her. "You claim that you were just following your mother's instructions. But you actively participated in discussing the sale of your grandmother's house. You knew about her unwillingness to move to a nursing home, and yet you spent a significant amount of money from the sale on your lavish wedding. How do you explain this?" Tiffany began to cry. I didn't know. I thought it was right. Mom said it was for her own good." "For her own good?" Mr. Davis repeated. "And you believed that depriving your grandmother of her home, sending her to a nursing home while you celebrated your wedding with her money, was for her own good?" Tiffany sobbed, unable to answer. Her lawyer again tried to stop the cross-examination, but the judge did not allow it. I looked at my granddaughter, at her tears, and there was no pity or sympathy in my chest. Only emptiness. I saw how greed and selfishness had destroyed her, how they had turned her into a stranger. After Tiffany's testimony, the judge called a recess. When we left the courtroom, I saw Brenda and Tiffany standing in a corner, surrounded by their lawyer. They were arguing heatedly, their gestures sharp, their voices tense. I realized they were desperate. Mr. Davis approached me. "Mrs. Johnson, their lawyer is again offering a settlement. They are willing to return your house, pay compensation, and, most importantly, they are willing to publicly apologize to you in court." My heart beat faster. A public apology. That was what I wanted most of all. Not just money, not just the house. I wanted them to admit their guilt, to suffer moral punishment. "I agree," I said. "But on one condition. The apologies must be sincere. And they must be made before the entire courtroom." Mr. Davis smiled. "I will convey your terms to them." When the session resumed, a tense silence filled the courtroom. The judge took his seat. Then he addressed Brenda and Tiffany's lawyer. "Counselor, do you have anything to say?" The lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my clients, Mrs. Brenda Smith and Miss Tiffany Smith, would like to make a statement." The judge nodded. Brenda stood up. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from tears. She looked at me, and in her gaze, I saw something akin to remorse. "Mom," she began, and her voice trembled. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was blinded by greed and selfishness. I caused you so much pain. I ask for your forgiveness." Her words were sincere. I saw it in her eyes, heard it in her voice. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they were tears not of pain, but of relief. Then Tiffany stood up. She was crying too. "Grandma," she said, "I also ask for your forgiveness. I was foolish. I didn't understand what I was doing. I'm so sorry." Her words were also sincere. I saw her suffering. I saw her realizing her mistake. I stood up from my seat. I walked towards them. Brenda and Tiffany looked up at me. I hugged them both. Tightly. "I forgive you," I whispered. "I forgive you both." Applause erupted in the courtroom. The judge smiled. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, I am glad to see that justice has prevailed. And I am glad to see that your family has found a path to reconciliation. He announced the verdict. My house was returned to me. Brenda and Tiffany were to pay me compensation for emotional distress and legal costs. But most importantly, they had to undergo family therapy to repair our relationship. After that day in court, when Brenda and Tiffany offered their apologies, a strained calm settled in the air. I hugged them, yes, I hugged them. And the words, "I forgive you," were sincere at that moment. My heart, tormented by pain and betrayal, longed for peace. I truly wanted to believe that they had changed, that they had realized their mistakes, that our family could heal. The judge, too, seemed pleased, seeing this outward reconciliation, and ruled that Brenda and Tiffany had to undergo family therapy, pay me compensation for emotional distress and legal costs, and, of course, return my house. I returned to my home, to these familiar walls that held so many memories. Every corner, every speck of dust seemed priceless to me. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, the old books, and felt life slowly returning to my body. The aroma of sweet potato pies, which I loved so much, once again filled my kitchen, but now it seemed to me not just the smell of food, but a symbol of rebirth. Brenda and Tiffany, at first, truly tried. They came to my house on weekends, helped with cleaning, brought groceries. In family therapy, they cried, spoke of their remorse, of how much they loved me and how ashamed they were of their actions. I listened to them, and hope flickered in my soul. Maybe everything would really change? Maybe we could restore what had been destroyed? But over time, I began to notice subtle, almost imperceptible changes. Brenda, under the guise of concern, started trying to control my finances again. "Mom, don't you think you're spending too much on this garden?" she would say when I bought new rose bushes. "Perhaps you should consider a more modest lifestyle? After all, the money you received won't last forever." She constantly hinted that I should think about the future and perhaps invest the remaining funds in some reliable fund that, I suspected, she would control. Tiffany, though more cautious, also revealed her true nature. She often asked about my savings, about how much money I had left after the house sale and compensation. "Grandma, haven't you thought about traveling more? Or buying yourself something really worthwhile?" she would say, and in her eyes I saw not concern, but a hidden interest in my money. She even tried to convince me to take out a loan against the house to renovate the interior, though I knew perfectly well that this was just a pretext for gaining access to my assets. I saw how they looked at my house. Not as my home, but as an asset. They repeatedly returned to the topic of its too large size for me alone, to the difficulty of its maintenance. They offered to help me sell it and buy something smaller, and the difference, of course, would be invested in their joint business, which, they said, would bring huge dividends. I felt their greed, like a snake, once again slithering out of its hiding places, despite all their vows and tears in court. One day Brenda came to me with a stack of papers. "Mom, I found a great option for you. It's a small but very cozy condominium in a good neighborhood. He will be perfect for you. We can sell this house and invest the difference in my new project. It will be beneficial for everyone." She said this with such an innocent smile, as if offering me a candy, not trying to deprive me of my home again. I looked at her, and at that moment, I realized that their remorse was just a mask worn for the court. They hadn't changed. They had simply become more cunning, more sophisticated in their attempts to seize my property. My heart ached with pain, but this time it wasn't the pain of betrayal, but the pain of disappointment. I had given them a chance, I had believed them, but they proved again that they were unworthy of my trust. I politely but firmly refused. "Brenda, I love my home. I'm not moving anywhere." She frowned. "Mom, you don't understand. It's for your own good. This house is too big, too expensive to maintain. You won't be able to handle it alone." "I'll manage," I replied, and a steely note entered my voice. "I've managed all my life, and I'll manage now." Brenda left, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere. I knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't give up so easily. I continued to work at Maria's bakery. The work gave me strength, distracted me from heavy thoughts. Maria was a true friend to me. She always listened to me, supported me, gave wise advice. I told her about my worries, about how Brenda and Tiffany were trying to manipulate me again. "Eleanor," Maria said one day, "you're too kind. Sometimes you have to be tough to protect yourself." Her words made me think. I had always been kind, always tried to see only the good in people. But now I understood that my kindness had been mistaken for weakness. And I could no longer let them take advantage of me. I began to develop a new plan. A plan that would once and for all put an end to their greed and show them who Eleanor May Johnson truly was. I remembered my secret asset, which I had never told anyone about, not even my late husband. It was something I had accumulated my entire life, bit by bit, cent by cent, saving every penny I could. It was my little secret, my safety net, my independence. I started to act. First, I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Davis. I told him about my concerns, about how Brenda and Tiffany were again trying to seize my property. He listened carefully. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I understand your concerns. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for relatives to try to take advantage of elderly people. But you have full rights to your property. And we can protect them." I nodded. "I want you to help me draft a new will. And I want it to be drafted in such a way that no one can contest it." Mr. Davis smiled. "As you wish, Mrs. Johnson. I will do my best." Over the next few weeks, we worked on the will. I carefully considered every clause, every detail. I wanted it to be perfect, to reflect my true wishes, and to be the gift that would shock them. I also began to actively manage my investments. I had always been cautious, but now I decided to take a risk. I invested some of my savings in several promising projects that I learned about from news and financial reports I studied at night. I felt adrenaline surge through my veins. It was risky, but I was ready for it. I knew I had to act decisively to achieve my goal. My investments began to bear fruit. Slowly but surely, my savings grew. I felt strong, independent. I was determined to show them that I was not just an old, helpless woman who could be kicked out of her home and stripped of everything. Brenda and Tiffany continued their attempts. They called me every day, came unannounced, trying to catch me off guard. They brought me brochures about luxurious nursing homes, about profitable investments, about promising business projects. I politely but firmly refused all their offers. One day Brenda came to me with a lawyer. He was a young, self-confident man who seemed to think I was a foolish old woman. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, "we are here to discuss your financial situation. Your daughter is very concerned about you. She believes you need help managing your assets." I looked at him, then at Brenda. In her eyes, I saw triumph. She thought she had cornered me. "My financial situation is not your concern, Mr." I paused for him to state his surname. "Mr. Harrison," he said, a little flustered. "Mr. Harrison," I repeated. "I manage my assets perfectly well. And I don't need your help." Brenda interjected. "Mom, please don't be so stubborn. We just want to help you." "Help me?" I scoffed. "You already helped me once by sending me to a nursing home and selling my house behind my back. I don't need that kind of help." Brenda's face paled. Mr. Harrison looked puzzled. He clearly hadn't expected such a strong rebuff from a foolish old woman. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone. "We just want to make sure your interests are protected." "My interests are protected," I replied. "I have my own lawyer who handles that perfectly well." I stood up. "I think our conversation is over. I need to go." Brenda and Mr. Harrison left, leaving me alone. I felt victorious. I had shown them that I was not as simple as they thought. I continued to work on my plan. I knew I had to wait for the right moment to deliver the decisive blow. I wanted my gift to be as effective as possible, to truly shock them and make them realize the full extent of their mistakes. Several months passed. My investments continued to grow. I felt confident, calm. I knew I was on the right track. One day, I received an invitation to a charity gala organized by Hope for Seniors. I decided to go. It was a perfect opportunity to show myself, meet the people who had supported me, and perhaps deliver my decisive blow. I put on my most beautiful dress, which I had bought specifically for the occasion. It was made of expensive silk, a deep blue color that accentuated my eyes. I styled my hair, applied light makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not an old, broken woman, but a strong, confident lady. When I arrived at the gala, I was greeted with honors. I was a guest of honor because my story had become known in philanthropic circles. In the middle of the evening, I saw Brenda and Tiffany. They were standing in a corner of the hall, looking a little lost. They clearly hadn't expected to see me there, especially in such company. Their faces were full of surprise, mixed with envy. I walked up to them. "Hello, Brenda." "Hello, Tiffany." They flinched. "Mom? What are you doing here?" Brenda asked, her voice full of disbelief. "I'm here to support the organization that helped me in my time of need," I replied, smiling. "And what are you doing here?" Tiffany hesitated. We just came to look around." "To look around?" I scoffed. "Or perhaps you came to find new victims?" Brenda and Tiffany's faces turned red. They didn't know what to say. At that moment, the host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight, we have a special guest, Mrs. Eleanor May Johnson, whose story has inspired many of us. She not only fought for her justice, but also decided to make a generous donation to our organization." A murmur went through the hall. Brenda and Tiffany looked at me with wide eyes. "Mrs. Johnson," the host continued, "would you please come up to the stage and say a few words?" I walked onto the stage. I looked at Brenda and Tiffany, who stood in the crowd, their faces filled with shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, and my voice was firm and confident. "I am here to tell you my story. A story of how my own daughter and granddaughter betrayed me, sent me to a nursing home, sold my house, and tried to strip me of everything I had." A gasp went through the hall. Brenda and Tiffany tried to hide in the crowd, but it was too late. All eyes were on me. But I didn't give up, I continued. I fought. I found the strength to stand up and assert my truth. And I want to tell you that no one, ever, should allow other people to strip them of their dignity, their freedom, their life. I paused, then continued. Today, I want to make a donation to Hope for Seniors. It is a donation of $5 million. A buzz went through the hall. $5 million. Brenda and Tiffany looked as if they had been struck by lightning. Their mouths were open, their eyes wide. They couldn't believe their ears. "This money," I said, "I earned myself. I invested, I took risks, I worked tirelessly. And I want this money to go to help elderly people who find themselves in the same situation as I was, so that no one else has to go through what I went through." I looked at Brenda and Tiffany. "This is my gift to you," I said, and a hint of irony entered my voice. "A gift that, I hope, will shock you and make you realize that greed and betrayal never go unpunished." Thunderous applause erupted in the hall. People stood up, applauding me. I felt happier than ever before. I had achieved my goal. I had shown them who Eleanor May Johnson truly was. Brenda and Tiffany hastily left the hall. They couldn't bear the shame. Their reputation was ruined. Everyone at the gala learned about their actions. Their attempts to control me, their greed, their betrayal, all of it was exposed to the world. After that evening, their lives changed. Brenda lost her job because her reputation was ruined. Tiffany canceled her lavish wedding because her fiancé learned the truth about her greed and refused to marry her. They were left with nothing, having lost everything they had because of their own greed. I, however, continued to live my life. I continued to work at the bakery, enjoyed my home, my garden. I traveled, met friends, engaged in philanthropy. I felt free, independent, happy. I was surrounded by the love and respect of people who valued me for who I am, not for what I have. Sometimes, when Brenda and Tiffany tried to contact me, I simply ignored their calls and messages. They would come to my house, ask for help, borrow money, but I would simply close the door in their faces. I wasn't cruel. I was simply giving them the opportunity to reap the consequences of their actions. I had given them a chance, but they had not taken it. I was Eleanor May Johnson, a woman who had been through a lot, but who never gave up. I was a woman who fought for her truth, for her family, for her dignity. And I won. I returned with a gift that shocked them. A gift of retribution, justice, and the rebirth of true values. My life became an example that, even in the darkest times, there is always hope, there is always a way out, and there is always an opportunity to find true happiness if you believe in yourself and fight for your truth.